Alright, I didn't really have a particular reason behind choosing this one. It's just sort of one of those random ones. And I don't recall it being a sport movie that I've tackled yet, or a sport in general that I've tackled yet in regards to this. Why not go ahead and do this? So, obviously, the thing I wasn't when I chose these two, I wasn't under the impression that they had more in common than I realized. Because obviously, initially choosing them was just, well, they're two basketball movies. They both have, the coaches that have to come in and basically fix what's really wrong in one way or another, whether it be a losing team or a team that may have never otherwise played without being chosen by them. And yeah, they both have, those cheesy shots of like the coach just standing on the empty court and looking around an empty gym and stuff like that. They've got, the cliche speeches and all that. Like, Coach Carter is by Paramount. It would be almost the exact same movie with the Disney logo on it, honestly. But maybe every now and then there'd be some mature content or whatever you want to call it taken out or altered or whatever. But yeah, and obviously both of them eventually find victory. Not only, maybe not always on the court, but both of them definitely find it off the court, whether it be getting an education or overcoming racism or and and race comes a little bit into play in Coach Carter too. Obviously, not near as much as Glory Road. But also the teachers in one way or another, or the coaches in one way or another, getting sort of condemned for their actions at some point. So obviously we'll be having flashbacks of Remember the Titans probably a lot during this. So not just because one is another Disney slash Bruckheimer movie, so there is that. And it's raining and somewhat stormy, so hopefully that doesn't pick up on the sound too much. But the other thing they had in common that I didn't realize was that these movies were released on the exact same day, exactly 1 year apart, with Coach Carter being January 13th, 2005, and Glory Road being January 13th, 2006. That is just a weird, freaky coincidence that I only realized like last night when I took a glance at their Wikipedia pages, just to do some final research, and that's what I came across. Yeah, but to talk about them individually, I think I do want to start with Coach Carter, where we're going to go back to, not as far as we do with Glory Road, we're going to 1999. And it's set in 1999 despite the fact that the soundtrack is just so full of that 2005 nostalgia. All the songs were recognizable back then, and we do know, research tells us anyway, that we're going to get, because obviously with movies like this there's going to be a lot of liberties taken, especially when you have a company as big as Disney for one of them. But it's my understanding that Coach Carter is actually pretty accurate, or at least as accurate as it pretty much possibly could be, while also being a movie, being helped by the fact that Ken Carter himself was a consultant on it, as I believe I saw in the credits Damien was to his son, who's played by Robert Richard in the movie. So that helps a lot, and I guess he was on the set like every day to make sure, and I think he said something like really specific, like how Samuel Jackson's performance is like 98.5% accurate, just stuff like that. So, and he praised the realism of the basketball scenes too. So, we do have that going in, and what's really obviously the main selling point to this movie is Samuel Jackson in the lead role, obviously. And it's my understanding that when they approached Carter about, who would play him in the movie, that was his only suggestion. Like, it was basically, Jackson or die. Which, of course, was, I imagine, easy to make happen. Because it just seems like a role that feels just absolutely tailor-made for him. And because he's got that obviously like unmatched presence, but he's also got something he can bring into it. Once again, if you want to go back to Remember the Titans and you look at what Denzel did with that character, where on the surface it feels like this really sort of, cliche sports movie with the cliche coach and the cliche speeches, just cliches everywhere. But there was something that he specifically brought to that movie, and something Jackson brings to this movie, that just somehow really makes it stand out in a really big way, and really sort of commands your attention in a way that maybe just a more, I guess, typical actor would. Because Samuel Jackson's one of those guys, where obviously we all know that Samuel Jackson can just walk into a room. He doesn't even have to say anything. If he just walks into a room, he's got a full command of the scene, and that is absolutely an asset when it comes to a role like this. I was also reading, apparently, like the young cast, like young Channing Tatum and all those others, basically worshipped him when he was on set, which really helps, and you can really see that. And how the players interact with him in character, let alone, you know, whatever was happening on the actual set. And yeah, you just really kind of gravitate towards him, and he even makes the speeches like really believable, and makes you kind of briefly acknowledge, well, this is just kind of like a cliche sports movie, but you also kind of forget it pretty fast too, because of just, you know, how much you're drawn in by him, regardless of what he might be saying or what's in the script and all that. And there's even those amusing scenes like sort of in between, like when he's debating with his wife about why he can't take the job, when we know this is leading to the cut where it's actually him taking the job, and stuff like that. But it all kind of works, whether it be a more comedic take to it or him being like dead serious about what he's working with. And of course he's obviously effortlessly brings out the more hardcore qualities to him, like the whole doing suicides for an hour and 7 minutes, saying stuff like, "Don't make me commit homicide, I said suicides," stuff like that. That might sound cheesy coming out of anybody else's mouth, but Samuel Jackson obviously will always make it work. And then even, and that even comes into play where it feels very much in the character as well as the actor, the whole naming the types of play after the women in his life, and past and present. Just these really great details they put in regards to not just the real story, but how they actually work as a movie character as well. And both Carter's presence on the set and Jackson's performance clearly play huge parts in bringing this to life in a really effective way. And then, as I was saying, you have some of the side characters, like Channing Tatum in his first role, a decade before they would go on to kill each other in The Hateful Eight. But then there's also characters that are on the side that you would think in another movie would be a bit more just kind of there, and they're coming in and out of the movie, which just kind of seem like they're there just for the sake of, well, here are the characters, but you don't really care that much, because not a lot is put into them. But this movie actually really goes that distance, even if it means being a little lengthier than it probably could be, a length that kind of starts to bring it down when it gets sort of in the one of those late stretches. But in the meantime, it really does help when you've got like the Channing Tatum character in particular. The way he sort of interacts with the others, not just with Carter, is really great. And there's sort of like that sort of pressure there. There's also the Kenyan character who has the pregnant girlfriend, who is Ashanti of all people. Remember 2005. So and yeah, that's one of those cases where you almost think, is this too much subplot? Like, is this too much to care? But it really does seem to actually go along with the whole idea of these guys receiving that education, not just, you know, on the court, but in, I guess, in life, if you want to say. Which obviously goes beyond whether or not they win or lose. And that sort of just kind of plays a part where he's not just being educated inside the school, but also out in real life by having to deal with this baby, whether it comes or not. But then another character that they handle really well is Cruz. Because what they've really done with him here is, he could have been that character that we've seen in all the sports movies that starts off on the team, but then there's like a bit of a breakup and he becomes an antagonist on a different team. But they do this whole storyline where, and this could have happened, this could have not worked because of how much his attitude might put us off in his first few scenes. But the way he actually comes back and really like not only is he like earning the respect of Carter, but he's kind of like earning the respect of the audience too, and actually making us like happy that he comes back and is willing to play by Carter's rules and do all that, which makes him a really good character. Even that time towards the end when he kind of starts to do that all over again, but we still kind of feel for him. Like, it takes him to like when we see him like revert to a life of crime or whatever, or an attempted life of crime, it feels less like, oh well, of course that's the direction he'd go, or of course it's a predictable cliche or whatever. It ends up making the character like really sympathetic and to an extent tragic. Obviously, it didn't go like all the way to the tragic route. Like it once again probably would have been too predictable, but it is nice that we can actually do that with that character, but he can actually have our sympathy the whole time and actually earn it from the audience, and it's really well done. Also, Ray Gonzalez, that actor, if you really like the Cruz character, his performance in this, he's actually the star of a really good movie called Illegal Tender that you should also seek out. Just throwing that out there. So, also, and as I was saying, there is the basketball scenes in general that Carter himself did praise in regards to their realism. They are really well done. Like, they're not too hectic like some basketball movies can probably be. There's not a whole lot of, cutting around frantically. There's nothing particularly feeling like hectic about it. It probably does use slow-mo one too many times, and that does start to make it feel more like it's, reverting back to that. Because sports movies are always going to have that cliche crutch that they can fall back on, just in case. And I think really Coach Carter using the slow-mo is kind of the only time that seems to really come through, or where it doesn't take what we're expecting from a sports movie and really feed off of it and make itself better using that. Which it does effectively throughout most of the movie, but sometimes, like those slow-mo moments, you can kind of catch it and be like, yeah, it's starting to feel a little more like that. But once that happens, though, in about, like, the hour mark or so, not the hour mark, when there's an hour left, because the movie is about 2 hours and 16 minutes, which is pretty long, but with, like, an hour left, Carter just takes basketball out of the equation pretty much entirely. And in this kind of movie, you're really not expecting that, unless you know the story, obviously. But if you go into this not knowing the story, that's like it taking what you're expecting and just kind of really turning it on its head and really showing what it wants its characters to do. And obviously, we're talking strictly about a movie. Obviously, I know I'm also talking about real life, so it sounds odd to say it's constructed in a certain way, but in regards to how the movie puts it together, which I'm assuming still, regardless of the realism that it is praised for, there has to be movies always working their own magic. So, speaking as a movie, yes, the structure is really well done. So, in the way that it really focuses on the whole education aspect, and it actually gets, and it's not just like an underlying thing, we also have, like, at the end when they lose and he says, you found the victory within yourselves and stuff like that. In another movie, that would probably be, like, really forced and really like, well, okay, that's kind of a cop-out because it still sucks that they lost. But because we have this whole portion devoted to the education angle, is what really makes that ending pay off, and it actually does feel like it's earned a sort of, if bittersweet, still there's a side of it that's certainly a happy ending because they did find their way in that regard. And when it talks about in the final text, instead of saying like, oh, they went on to, win all this and stuff like that, it's like, well, they didn't win, but this person went to college, this person went to college, this person got an education, and it still feels like this happy, inspirational ending. And I think that's really what they pulled off quite nicely here, while also not feeling like they stray too much away. Like, it always feels like a basketball movie, despite the fact that we completely drop basketball somewhere with like an hour left. So that's where the movie's really big strengths are. And on top of the other supporting characters I mentioned, there's also some people that aren't players that have really strong scenes, like Octavia Spencer. And the scene where she basically has to convince him to let her son play again is a really nice, strong scene and good. Not just for her to kind of have that one scene, but also Carter's character, and the character of her son, too, to really kind of have that hopeful moment of redemption, and the fact that she kind of opens that door. It's a really good scene. Obviously, this is directed by Thomas Carter, who is of no relation. I think most people, when it came out, assumed that, like, before they realize that the guy's name is Ken Carter, they just see the poster and they think, whoa, the actual fucking dude made it. No, not quite. This is the guy that directed Save the Last Dance, and you can kind of tell by the way it brings in the it splits itself up between the actual event, whether it be basketball or dancing, and the subplots. But obviously, the subplots are not near as melodramatic as in Save the Last Dance as they are here. They're less melodramatic here. Is what I'm trying to say. And they feel very much more real because of that. So I really like that he was able to sort of find that ground, despite feeling like he was in somewhat similar territory. He was able to certainly add much more of a realism to this. And yeah, it does get into some pretty cheesy territory, like when it goes full Dead Poet Society and he walks into the gym and the desks are in there and all that. And yeah, it's inspirational to an extent, sure. Um, but I do think it's kind of where the movie kind of reaches its peak cheesiness that it actually had been doing a good job of avoiding up to this point. But once again, it's kind of hard to criticize like real life, especially when you're not quite sure what is and what isn't. But yeah, but then there's obviously, like I said, there's almost the cliche ending, where it looks like they're gonna win. They're gonna come back at after getting the speech at halftime, and they're gonna have the big comeback. And it's like they get this close to the big comeback, and they still lose. And how they manage to like still kind of avoid that and actually take the happy ending in another direction. And another way they really throw a wrench in that is what happens with the baby subplot, where she decides to not have it, is also kind of a bit of a gut punch and a bit something that kind of goes against what we might expect. But once again, it's all about them getting the life experience also and the education, which is just as important to the movie as the basketball, and these are really great ways to show that off. So that's what Coach Carter accomplished, and like I said, it may feel a bit too long once it gets to some stretches, but overall, it still does a really good job of balancing both those different things and taking us into both those directions, with one more so coming out on the top, probably the more important one, so there is that. To go to Glory Road, we're going to jump back about 3 years to the mid-60s, where the Josh Lucas character is the coach, Don Haskins, who basically brought in like an unprecedented number of black players onto his team at the time when obviously racism was at a pretty big high, especially in the setting, and the idea that this would eventually lead to what's considered like the most, I think, the most important game in college basketball history and one of the biggest upsets in sports in general history. At least that's what the ending text tells us. So, yeah, as we meet him and we see him sort of introducing with the players, this is, we get some stuff in here that's, okay, when it comes to sports movies, there is the tired cliches, but there's the good cliches too, the cliches that we love. And Glory Road has some that Coach Carter avoided that we do love, like when we get the recruitment montage, I think is always fun, where he goes and finds like each individual player and gets to see them, and we even get to see Haskins like play with them, which is really interesting. Some stuff we didn't get to see in Coach Carter. But then there's also I guess we should talk about Josh Lucas real quick, kind of being the center of the movie. Yeah, he does. Like, I think they wanted to cast like Ben Affleck or something, but he was there was like a scheduling conflict. So Josh Lucas, despite the fact that he does actually get to play at least a little bit in the movie, he gained like 43 pounds, I think it said, which is, you really can't tell. I don't know if it was all for naught or not, but yeah, but he is, he has to be very believable in a couple of ways, most importantly, and that is, he's very believable when he gets the big, coach scenes, the big speech scenes and stuff like that. When he has to be, like, really hard on them, we do fully believe it. But then there's also the more emotional side when we see, like one of the best moments in the movie is the very end when the game reaches its conclusion. The way he just, like, sort of drops in his chair in disbelief, and it's like the whole events of the movie seem to be spinning through his head all at once, and it's like overwhelming. That's a really great moment that he captured really well. That yeah, I don't want to immediately say I don't know if Affleck could have captured something like that, at least to the extent that Lucas did. But yeah, it is very nice that we have what we have. And so of course he goes and he meets up with each character, and it is. We do get to, like, the thing about it is, and the admirable thing about the movie, is you wonder how much it's going to beat around the bush, because it's got a really heavy subject matter, but it's also got Disney's name plastered on it and a PG rating. But they get into it pretty quickly. Like you don't feel them dancing around it too much. Like we do. Obviously, Josh Lucas has lines like, I don't see color, I see quick and I see skill, stuff like that. And when he goes and he recruits somebody, he says, like, you know, we're going to go down to Texas. And his first response is, you mean Texas? Like, where I'll get lynched? And stuff like that. And there's the whole really kind of sad moment when the team is first introduced onto the court. And it's like a white player comes out and there's applause. Another white player comes out, there's applause. Derek Luke comes out and it gets really silent and the applause and the noise just dies. And as each black player starts to come out, the silence gets more and more deafening. But then it does obviously have a lot more that it needs to show to get more into that period and what it was exactly that they were facing. And the way that they were able to make that material sort of accessible to, like, I guess a younger audience by rating it PG and putting Disney's name on it, but not shying away from the, you know, the use of slurs and stuff like that. When the hotel room is trashed and it's written on the walls in, like, red. The bathroom scene towards the end. It is very easy, especially today, to imagine a company like Disney maybe dancing around that and trying to show it in the softest way possible. So the fact that they pretty much did probably as much as they could get away with being a PG Disney movie is something I really like. I do know that there was some controversy about certain portrayals, like the portrayal of the John Voight character being like he was sort of misrepresented in the movie as like a racist. And I guess that like angered a lot of people because that's not actually the way he was, and that was more them kind of working the movie around to basically try to give themselves somewhat of an antagonist. I'll come back to that when we talk about Voight's performance, but there's also the whole thing of apparently, like one of the scenes in the movie when they play a game in Texas and the crowd is like, you know, throwing concession at them and screaming racial slurs at them. Apparently that never happened. And a lot of people got really rightfully pissed off that they were portrayed that way, and Disney did a very Disney apology saying, well, we needed to, you know, add to the stakes and we had to, you know, put some stuff in there. It's not a documentary, stuff like that. And I certainly get the excuse it's not a documentary for a lot of movies, but I mean, this particular thing does seem a bit damning to a certain group of people to just sort of make up for the sake of moving the plot forward. I'm sure there had to have been other ways to do that. You have a whole movie, and there are also plenty of scenes where this is done. Like I said, I'm sure you could have done it in another way. Like, there had to have been more real events you probably could have used here. Whether it be the bathroom beating or the hotel getting trashed and all that. I said, it's terrible to think that there had to have been more, but yeah, at the same time, this is a bit of a touchy place to sort of just represent certain people like that. So I do definitely get the people kind of having a sort of not so great opinion of that kind of that side of the movie, that side of what Disney put into this. So I did just feel a need to bring that up since I'm also praising them for what they did show. So there is that. And there's also, and yeah, when they handle stuff like that heavy stuff, like the beating in the bathroom, for instance, to one of the nicest characters in the movie, of course. And it's one of those scenes where it's like just the way the editing is, you can tell something horrible is about to happen, to where we're in the bathroom and he sees the guys, or the guys see him, and then it cuts back, and then it cuts back. The cutting is getting quicker when it goes back to the guys out there in the bathroom, and we know something horrible is going to happen. So that was kind of a nice lead into that, to show we'll also talk about the director too. But another thing is that they also kind of show that there's also the culture clash with them sort of on the other side, like when they go and it's like like the Ola scene, when he says that Ola means hello Puerto Ricans, or when the dude basically wants a hot dog from this poor guy that can't understand him, so he just aggressively repeats hot dog-o as if the guy is supposed to know. But that seems less like the stuff that they're dealing with is coming from, like, you know, hatred and stuff like that. This is just more like what's the word? Ignorance is like this sort of, you know, not hate-induced ignorance is coming from that side. So there is a clear difference here, but there's also, but yeah, I mean, it does kind of like keep going and going and going though. Like there's the Derek Luke line when they walk into the room and he says, "Hey guys, look like Mexicans," and the guy says, "I'm 6'3", and he says, "Fine, look like 3 Mexicans," and and there's stuff like that. And there is some stuff that nowadays might rub people the wrong way, like the fact that one of the big driving forces to Haskins' character is that he's teaching the girls' basketball team, and the movie and everything around him sort of portrays it as like him teaching a girls' basketball team is like a super incredible demeaning thing to him. So that's why he has to like go find, you know, a guy's team and ends up doing what he does. So that might rub people the wrong way now, but that was his driving point, I guess. If there's one thing the movie does need, it needs a lot more interacting with the characters. And like scenes like when they're on the bus after the hotel's been trashed and they say stuff, they have the conversation like, "Do you ever get scared?" and stuff like that. I did read up that the director that made this was hired by Bruckheimer after Bruckheimer saw some commercials he directed. He never made a full-length movie, and he hasn't since. So it's hard to say what this experience was like for him, but despite the fact that it is pretty well handled overall, but he did specifically say that when you make commercials, like the great thing about taking on the job was that when you make commercials, you get to do like a new thing every week. Like 1 week you can do like an action thing, and then 1 week a dramatic thing, then 1 week a comedic thing. And the way that you can take you're used to bouncing around all those emotions. So in this, you get like the basketball action, you get the really heavy drama, and you get some comedic moments when they're all interacting. But he did say that he had a lot of trouble with character arcs because that's not something that happens in commercials. So I do get, coming from that perspective, how it seems like so sort of lacking in that department, especially since the character development in Coach Carter is so great, especially among the other players and the way they interact with each other. And it does, for the most part, make you not get to know the characters too well. Like, it's confusing that there's 2 of them named Willie, and after a while you're just like, that one's Derek Luke, that one's the sick one. That one's the nice guy with the mustache. And after a while, you just sort of... But even regardless of that, though, they do end up having their own individual moments sometimes, like the "Are you scared?" scene, or the scene where, once again, the coach is confronted by a mother, where she wants him to just let the sick guy play because she says these will be the last games he ever plays. That's a really strong scene and a really powerful moment, especially at the end when he goes up in the stands and like hugs her and stuff like that. It's really good and powerful stuff there that they do manage to squeeze in, even if the characters don't always feel well-rounded. So there is that. Now I did want to talk about Jon Voight real quick. Talking about obviously it's widely believed that his character was like really misrepresented, particularly with the racism angle. The first thing you'll notice is the prosthetics. Probably, I think that was probably them trying to sort of get the lightning to strike twice after what he did in Ali, that ultimately led to him getting an Oscar nomination, being like totally unrecognizable under that makeup. Not so unrecognizable here. It does look a little ridiculous, but I do get the idea of trying to make him sort of look like the dude, especially when you see the pictures at the end. But yeah, he was probably better off just looking like Jon Voight and just being like maybe not the best physical casting, because he can still bring a lot to the performance even through stuff like that. Like the moment when he's trying to build them up and he says you're gonna win this game, now go out there and make me a profit. Profit in like the biblical sense, not the money sense, obviously. But and you can see in his eyes like the desperation, but he's also like, there's such an understanding of his opponent and their skills, and the fact that he acknowledges that in a very respectful way while also being competitive. So yeah, I do think he actually really brought a lot to his small screen time, even if he was buried under ridiculous prosthetics, and even if there were some moments that might have been misrepresentation. So, and the fact that, and that's the thing too, that's the problem with the whole racist angle, is that the movie actually does a decent job, like on the court, is to not portray him as an antagonist. So that did seem like an odd angle to take. And like I said, make him more like somebody who clearly understands his opponent, but is still incredibly competitive and stuff like that, and does sense that desperation towards the end there. So yeah, that's kind of an unfortunate portrayal that it's got that one side, but it's also got this really good side to it too, the way they did it. So yeah, that's about all I have to say about Glory Road. Also, they did do something a little better than most movies do. I always get like it's just a movie thing I really don't like because it's so manipulative when a true story ends and you see like footage of the real people or pictures of the real people and stuff like that. Stuff that big audiences like really eat up. But that they actually went and like conducted these actual interviews for the sake of putting them on the side of the credits. And when you do that, like when it's actual part of the movie, then I think it really does work, and it feels like it's coming from a much more real place, and a much something that kind of opens up another viewpoint to actually hear the actual people actually talking within the context of the movie is a totally different thing than just showing pictures or random footage just to say, hey, this is what they looked like, see how good the actors were. So there is that. So overall, I do like both of these quite a bit. I do think, despite its length, I prefer Coach Carter. It's just really much better on like the way it handles the stronger individual characters, and as always, Jackson's performance goes a really long way, but that's not to undermine the really good stuff Lucas is doing too. But I mean, Samuel Jackson in a role like this is just a match made in heaven. So, and with all these great characters to back it up, and how much it was able to split up the story and remain a sports movie even when it wasn't really being one, it just makes it really well done. So, yeah, I would take Coach Carter, but I still like Glory Road quite a bit. So that's what we have here. I may or may not stay in the sports vein. Somebody requested one a while back, a boxing one, that I'm probably going to look into doing. If I can obtain copies of them, because I haven't seen them since the first time I've seen them, so I have to watch them again and then do this. So hopefully I can do that one next week, and then we'll see what happens. So yeah, and all the big reviews are coming too. So until all that stuff, that's it.